Imagine a man standing before a woman he deeply desires. He says nothing wrong. He doesn't appear aggressive, disrespectful, or explicitly needy. But still, something about her cools. A gaze that loses its sparkle, a touch that hesitates, an interest that dissolves into thin air for no apparent reason. This man, like millions, is about to pay an invisible, silent, but devastating price. The price of seeming to need her. Not because he talked too much, but because there was a subtle energy in his presence that gave everything away. That he placed her above himself, that he wanted to be chosen, that he, even without saying it, was begging. And women, even the most empathetic, don't respect men who bow to desire. This isn't about cruelty, it's about instinct, an evolutionary logic that predates any modern seduction manual. The female brain carries thousands of years of calibration to detect a pattern. Men who live in scarcity, emotional, social, or sexual, are a risk, not a prize. And however much compassion, tenderness, or even momentary attraction she may feel, respect dies the moment she senses you need her to feel like someone. The most brutal thing about all this need is almost never expressed in words. It seeps through the gaze seeking approval. It leaks in the hesitant touch. It throbs in the anxiety with which you respond to a message. And worse, it reveals a truth that men themselves refuse to accept. That they still believe they need to be accepted by a woman to feel complete. But female respect, real respect, the kind that makes her look at you with admiration in her eyes and calm in her soul, that respect is only born when you prove that you don't need her. When you are the choice and not the dependent. Friedrich Nietzsche said that what is done out of love is beyond good and evil. But he also said that what is good is everything that increases the feeling of power in man. And that's where the brutal contradiction lies. Genuine love is only possible when it is not an escape from one's own weakness. When it's not a desperate attempt to feel valuable through the validation of another. When loving isn't a plea for salvation, but a choice made by someone who is already whole. Most men don't live like that. They live like emotional chameleons. They adjust their personality based on what they think will please others. They become versions molded by the fear of losing the woman they haven't even won over. And in this process, they lose their own value. They lose respect. And worse, they lose themselves. That's why this video isn't about tricks. It's not about feigning disinterest. It's about understanding, at the deepest level, why women respect men who don't put them at the center of their universe. Men who know that affection should be offered, never begged for. Over the next few minutes, you will understand not only the mechanisms that govern this silent respect, but also how to embody it, without arrogance, without games, without masks. We will expose the hidden layers of neediness, unravel the power of strategic indifference, and finally reveal how to cultivate a scarcity mindset so powerful that your mere presence will make her a fascinated spectator. But first, we need to look into the eyes of what most corrodes masculine energy without him realizing it. The illusion that needing is the same as loving. She found you interesting. Her gaze lingered on yours for a moment long enough to ignite a spark. The initial chemistry was there, silent, almost primal. But then you wanted to make sure. You wanted to be more attentive, kinder, more present. You started responding too quickly. You sent a good morning message. You showed concern, affection, interest, and everything that seemed promising withered. Without explanations, without confrontation. Just silence. Or worse, the change in tone, that subtle distancing that reveals a truth men struggle to accept. You ruined everything by trying too hard to get it right. That's where the poison begins. The most dangerous kind. The one that comes disguised as good intentions. Neediness isn't shouted, it's whispered in the subtext of actions. And worse, you don't perceive it, but she feels it, viscerally, almost instinctively. When you act as if the simple fact that she gives you attention is already a reward, you shift the balance of value between you. It doesn't matter if you're handsome, intelligent, or successful. If she senses you're desperate for connection, her mind automatically interprets, this man has no options. And if he has no options, maybe there's a reason. Maybe he's not as valuable as he seemed. Maybe the first impression was a mistake. This judgment isn't conscious. It's a brain reflex. Evolutionary psychology explains it clearly. Throughout history, women who bonded with emotionally dependent men were more exposed to risk. Insecure men became aggressive, jealous, unstable. Men who lacked options were generally those least valued by the group. Biology learned to decode these signals even before language. Neediness, therefore, is a silent alarm that triggers the female defense mechanism. She doesn't want to be your oxygen. She wants to feel that you breathe even without her. And this is where many men get lost, because they confuse demonstrations of affection with excessive validation. They believe that showing interest is key, when in fact, showing that your life doesn't depend on her response is what ignites true fascination. There's a classic psychology experiment called the reactance effect, which shows how we tend to value more what is limited, scarce, or denied to us. The more emotionally available you are, the cheaper your subjective value becomes. And conversely, the less predictable you are, the more centered you seem, the more space you give for desire to grow. But be warned, it's not about pretending. The problem with most advice on being indifferent or playing hard to get is that these are mechanical strategies. And no woman is stupid. They sense when a man is just feigning coldness, in a desperate attempt not to seem desperate. What works isn't forced distancing. It's real life that's already so full that she needs to fight to get in. What attracts isn't the pose of someone who doesn't care, but the inner truth of someone who doesn't need female approval to feel worthy. And at this point, a tough reflection is in order. Why do you need approval so much? Why does your self-esteem still depend on a woman's interest? The answer often lies in the distorted emotional models you learned in childhood. Perhaps you were conditioned to be nice to receive attention. Perhaps you grew up hearing that you needed to please to deserve love. And this generated a hidden pattern. The fear of displeasing, the panic of rejection, the desperate desire not to be abandoned. The problem? It leaks out. It leaks out in the eyes that ask, in the words that try to convince, in the insecurity that screams behind the kindness. Consider the men who have most attracted women throughout history. Casanova, for example, wasn't just a conqueror, he was a master of selective attention. He listened more than he spoke. He discovered a woman's desires before expressing his own. And this created a reversal of energy. She felt she needed to conquer him, not the other way around. Today, many men fail because they place themselves on a pedestal of anxiety. They become little emotional servants of an idealized female figure. They give themselves and lose. Not because loving is wrong, but because love born of neediness isn't love, it's disguised codependency. And this is where the brutal truth needs to be stated. Nobody respects someone who needs too much. This applies to friendships, business, family relationships, and especially romantic relationships. Emotional dependence is perceived as weakness. And weakness, however painful it may seem, doesn't generate desire. It may generate pity, it may generate care, but never respect. And without respect, there is no admiration. Without admiration, there is no lasting attraction. Only tolerance. So what to do? The first step is to stop trying to prove yourself. You don't need to show that you're good enough. You need to be good enough for yourself. And that only happens when you stop living waiting for external recognition. Developing a rich life full of purpose is more seductive than any technique. Work on your body, your mind, your talents. Create a strong social circle, solid friendships, a routine that makes you wake up with enthusiasm. This is the kind of silent power that women perceive without you needing to say a word. You don't need to say you're valuable. You need to live in a way that makes it impossible for her not to notice. Because deep down, what every woman respects in a man is the fact that he remains himself, whether she's by his side or not. This is the kind of energy that doesn't beg, doesn't force, doesn't convince, it simply exists. Present, solid, irresistibly authentic. And it is with this foundation that we will move forward. Because if neediness is the poison, unwavering presence is the antidote. And that's what you're going to learn now. How to cultivate a type of indifference that doesn't repel, but attracts. Not because it's cold, but because it's magnetic. Because the woman who feels you don't need her to exist is the woman who will inevitably start fighting to deserve a place in your reality. Imagine an emotional earthquake raging around you, shouts, demands, tests, contradictory messages. A woman in emotional turmoil unleashes upon you the typical storm of female uncertainty. And while most men sink trying to calm, understand, or justify themselves, you remain silent. Calm, firm, observant. You don't react with despair. You don't rush to fix things. You don't seek forgiveness that wasn't asked for. You simply remain unshaken. And in that moment, without you saying a single word, something changes in her perception. You cease to be just another man trying to please and become an anchor, a pole of stability, a presence. This is where respect is born. Because a woman, even when emotional, tests. And these tests are not malicious. They are unconscious invitations for you to prove your strength. Every woman, even the most rational, carries within her the need to trust. But trust is not won with sweet words. Trust is born when, in the face of chaos, a man doesn't fall apart. When he holds his own emotion with the same firmness with which he holds her gaze. And it's at that moment that she understands, I can relax with this man because he doesn't lose control just because I'm out of control. This is the principle of active indifference. But be careful, we're not talking about apathy. The apathetic man doesn't care because he's emotionally numb. The unwavering man, on the other hand, cares, but doesn't lose his balance. He feels, but he's not a hostage to his emotions. He listens, but he doesn't desperately try to respond. He sees the game unfolding and plays on another level. This requires mastery. This requires presence. This requires the kind of masculinity that doesn't need to be shouted because it's felt. In silence, in the gaze, in the smallest gesture. In the series Mad Men, Don Draper represents this archetype with surgical precision. He doesn't rush, he doesn't justify every decision, he doesn't despair when questioned. He's the kind of man who, upon entering a room, alters the dynamic without uttering a word. Why? Because he carries presence. He doesn't compete, he is. And this, for the female psyche, is profoundly seductive. Not because of forced mystery, but because of the silent certainty of someone who doesn't need to prove anything. It's this kind of presence that transforms desire into obsession. Because women aren't just attracted by words, they're attracted by how a man makes them feel. And the feeling of being in the presence of an unwavering man is addictive. That's why presence is power. Presence isn't about being in the same room. It's about being energetically there. Whole, firm, observant, without projecting or begging. A present man dominates the environment because he doesn't try to dominate it. He's simply so centered that the world revolves around him. And this isn't magic. This is training. It's self-knowledge. It's cutting out internal noise. It's stopping living at the mercy of others' reactions and starting to act from one's own principles. A man like that doesn't change his mind to please. He doesn't get upset by rejection. He doesn't get lost trying to please those who test him. He's there, like a rock, like a vertex, like a gravitational center. This stability has a brutal psychological effect on women. Because throughout life, most female experiences have involved male emotional instability. Men who yell, disappear, bend over backward, change their tone. Men who oscillate between affection and control. Men who break down when contradicted. When a woman finds a man who doesn't break down, who doesn't change direction out of anxiety, who doesn't react with despair to drama, her system collapses. Because she no longer has control. She finds herself, for the first time, facing someone who isn't there to receive emotional orders, but to exist on his own axis. This, of course, activates the most primitive side of desire, the archetype of the silent warrior, the man who goes into battle and returns without boasting. The man who makes decisions because they are right, not because he seeks applause. This solid masculinity is rare, because it demands more than techniques. It demands the death of ego. It demands inner alignment. And above all, it demands the courage to be misunderstood. Because when you don't react the way they expect, the world calls you cold, arrogant, difficult. But in truth, you are simply unwilling to bend for fear of losing. And that is true freedom. Nietzsche said that happiness is the feeling that power grows, that a resistance has been overcome. And that is exactly what happens to the man who refuses to be reactive. He doesn't seek happiness in female acceptance. He finds pleasure in growing in the face of challenge, in expanding his capacity to remain whole even in the face of rejection, silence, or the toughest emotional test. This silent internal growth generates a kind of energy that women perceive. They can't describe it, but they feel it. They feel they are in the presence of a rare man. And that's what disarms them. That's what calms them. That's what makes them respect him. And yes, they will test him. Always with silence, with games, with provocations. Not because they are bad, but because that's how they identify what is real. Words lie, emotions don't, and every test is a way to check the man's emotional foundation. If he shows signs of insecurity, the charm breaks. But if he simply observes, breathes, responds firmly or silently, trust grows. Because the woman feels, he doesn't depend on my reaction to feel stable. That, for her, is more aphrodisiac than any physical beauty. And how is this presence cultivated? It begins with body language. Shoulders back, chin aligned, direct gaze, without aggression, without submission. It's the posture of someone who is comfortable in their own skin. Then, the tone of voice. Firm, slow, without the rush to be understood. A man who speaks slowly isn't trying to prove anything. He's used to being heard, and that communicates more power than any shout. Next, the silences. Knowing when to pause, knowing not to fill every space. Silence, when used well, is mesmerizing. Because it shows dominance. Only those who don't fear what will be thought are truly silent. But true presence is born in the mind, in the content you carry, in the beliefs that guide your actions. You can't pretend to be unshakable if inside you're collapsing. Therefore, building this masculinity requires internal training. Meditation, reading, solitude, confronting real discomfort. Every moment you face pain without running away, you become stronger. Every decision made based on value and not on a desire for acceptance sharpens you. And the more you align yourself with your principles, the less you need female validation. And the less you need it, the more she respects you. This leads us to one of the greatest unspoken truths of seduction. Women don't love men who put them at the center of the universe. They love men who invite them to orbit something bigger, a purpose, a vision, a structure, a path. And only a centered man can offer that. Most offer affection. The few offer direction. And that's why the few are chosen. That's why they are remembered, desired, followed. Because a woman doesn't just want to feel, she wants to trust. And there is no trust without structure. Emotional structure, life structure, value structure. When she realizes that, by her side, there's a man who doesn't bend to the winds of emotion, she can finally relax. She can surrender. Because there is no danger. Because there is no game. Because there is someone who sustains his own world without asking her to sustain it along with him. That is the new power. The new seduction. The new respect. The respect that is born not from fear, but from admiration. Not from domination, but from presence. And it is this respect that transforms ordinary men into unforgettable figures. Have you ever seen a rare jewel being sold on the sidewalk? Have you ever seen an original Rolex begging to be bought by anyone who passes by? The answer is obvious, and so is the reason. Everything that is valuable is not offered. It is not desperately displayed. It doesn't beg for attention. On the contrary, it exists in scarcity. And precisely for that reason, it fascinates. The same applies to men. And this is one of the greatest silent secrets of seduction. The most desired man is not the most handsome, nor the richest. He is the rarest. He is the one who lives in scarcity, who offers little of himself and only when he wants to. And therefore, every moment spent with him carries the weight of privilege. The female mind is biologically programmed to seek what is difficult to achieve. Why? Because for millennia, the most valuable partner was the one who had the most options, the most control, the most dominance. If a man was available to all, it was because no one chose him exclusively. And if no one chose him, something in him must be lacking. Now, if he was sought after, desired, inaccessible, that triggered scarcity, and the symbolic value skyrocketed. This process continues today. In every dating app, in every conversation, in every flirtation, her brain is silently judging. Does this man seem to have options? Or does he seem desperate for me? The problem is that most men still live in the logic of false abundance. They think that the more gifts they give, the more messages they send, the more they declare their love, the more they will be valued. But the effect is the opposite. Overexposure kills the mystery. Excessive availability stifles attraction. Because desire doesn't arise from excess, it arises from absence, from doubt, from waiting, from the uncertainty of being seen again. That's why the man who knows how to be absent with class is infinitely more respected than the one who is always there, always ready, always available. But pay attention. Scarcity isn't disappearing. Scarcity is existing in abundance for oneself. Being so complete, so involved in your own life, so fueled by your own projects, means that the time you offer someone becomes inherently valuable. Not because you want to play games, but because you are busy living. This scarcity is natural, and that's precisely why it's powerful. Because when you show up, it knows he's not here out of neediness. He's here by choice. And that changes everything. How do you build this high scarcity mindset? It starts with routine. The man who wakes up with a full schedule, defined goals, clear projects, this man can't afford to get lost in empty messages or emotional games. He doesn't have time for drama. He doesn't have the energy to chase what isn't available. His attention is selective. And when he offers that attention, it's worthwhile. It's worth more than 1,000 compliments from a needy man. Because it's rare. Because it's chosen. Because it's scarce. Then comes the social circle. A man with high scarcity doesn't live in isolation. He circulates. He knows people. He is seen. He has options. He receives glances. This doesn't mean he's showing off. It means he's desired. And that creates a brutal psychological effect. When a woman realizes that others desire him, she wonders, what are they seeing that I haven't seen yet? That's the social proof effect, the social validation of male worth. But this only happens when you actually build that circle, not when you pretend to have options. And then comes the purpose. Nothing is more aphrodisiac than a man who is so aligned with his own path that he doesn't deviate for love, sex, or passion. He loves, but doesn't lose himself. He feels, but doesn't abandon himself. He yields, but never negates himself. And it is this kind of energy that a woman respects, because she feels that by his side, she will be invited to something greater. Not to be the center, but to be a part. Not to control, but to add. And that, for the mature woman, is irresistible. A clear example of this can be seen in the figure of James Bond. He doesn't beg, he doesn't run, he doesn't insist. He appears, charms, conquers, and continues. Because his mission is greater, his purpose is stronger. His scarcity is not a game, it's a consequence. And precisely for that reason, he remains in the minds of all who cross his path. Even those who lose him continue to talk about him, because men like that are irreplaceable. They are unique. But the most dangerous thing for the average man is trying to imitate this posture without having built real value. Because when you feign scarcity but live in emptiness, she notices. When you try to act like you don't care, but inside you're desperate for attention, she feels it. Because women don't just respond to what you say, they respond to your energy. And if your energy says, notice me, choose me, want me, no matter how quiet you are, she will notice and you will be unmasked. Therefore, building true scarcity requires sacrifice. It requires saying no. It requires losing women who don't respect you to gain the respect of those who see you as rare. It requires being alone at times so you never truly feel alone again. It requires playing the part of absence so that your presence has weight. It requires accepting that you are the prize. Not because someone said so, but because you built it. Because you know. Because you live this way. And that changes everything. Because the woman who perceives this doesn't dare treat you as replaceable. She treads more carefully. She observes more attentively. She feels she needs to conquer. And that's exactly what balances the game. Because when she feels she already has you, she stops fighting. But when she feels she could still lose you, even while being with you, she keeps her best self active. Respect, admiration, emotional investment. We've reached the end, but perhaps your true beginning is yet to come. If you've understood everything said so far, you've already realized the game doesn't forgive those who play small. Women don't wait. The world doesn't wait. And the most brutal truth is this: either you learn to master desire, or you will be eternally dominated by it. But mastering desire isn't luck. It's not genetics. It's applied behavioral science with precision. And that's exactly what you'll find in the Forbidden Manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds. The complete, direct, sharp, no-nonsense audiobook. Do you want to know what to say in the first 60 seconds to generate immediate psychological impact? Do you want to understand the hidden triggers that activate the female attraction instinct without seeming needy, manipulative, or obvious? Do you want to have in your hands a behavioral code that transforms casual encounters into addictive connections? Then you don't need another YouTube video. You need the Forbidden Manual that teaches what no one has dared to say. And it's ready for you. In audio, for you to listen to anywhere as many times as you want until it all becomes second nature to you. Click now. Not because you need to, but because she'll realize it when you know something most people can't even imagine.